Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us. That's Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found.
This is the
Independent
Filmmakers Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Independent Filmmakers Guide. I'm your host today, Matt Mundy, and well, today we have a really cool and incredibly important part of the movie making process to discuss today. And that's specifically key art, poster art, that thing, that indelible image or collection of images, which is to be the foundation of your movie's campaign, a visual anchor, if you will, to point that points the story in someone's imagination. And so, of course, to do that today, to help us do that, couldn't think of anyone better than the incredibly talented and ridiculously accomplished design director and brand and key art designer with over 15 years of experience working with some of the biggest names in entertainment, including NBC, WWE, A&E, MLB. I mean, if it's got initials, he can give it a poster. It's Eric Vasquez. Eric, man, great to have you.
Hey, Matt, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today and to join you on the podcast. Thank you for the lovely introduction. It's great to be here.
Dude, just trying to do you justice vocally, what you do visually. This is going to be a great conversation. First of all, let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why you why you do it. Yeah.
Well, I've been doing key art design. Like you said, it's kind of the anchor, for any kind of type of big entertainment production, right? Like television, film, but it can also span to other things like sports, podcasts, album covers for musicians, and even live events. So it's something that I've been very drawn to since I kind of got my career going, in New York City as a designer.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, like, even thumbnails too. I mean, that's a whole other thing right now.
Oh, absolutely. To tell you the truth, Matt, like when I first got into doing key art design and poster design, I think it was around 2009. I'm probably aging myself a little bit here, but
no, it's just the experience.
It's the experience, man, and when I first got into it, like print design was huge, right? Like you would see so many, movie posters on the sides of buses and billboards. And over the years, especially the last, I would say, 5-6 years, like you said, a lot of it has gone digital. Now it's like everything that's on we call it like SVOD, right? The streaming video on demand. Everything you see on platforms or inside of your apps, a lot of the key art has kind of migrated to those new mediums and platforms.
Yeah, so you've got to be, able to be transmedia that way and kind of be everywhere, be it print or online, and have your images translate and work that way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, I will always have a soft spot for print. Like there's something really nice about, just having that tangible, thing that you can look out and feel and touch. But absolutely, you need to be able to kind of cross over and do both. So I've been very fortunate to have had some great experience in doing print, digital, social, animation, really trying to tie those things together in my work in these last few years.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of with your work, how let's see, like how did you get started? Like what'd you study? What attracted you to this?
I mean, it's such a good question, and I feel like for me, I'm a nerd, right? So I'm not gonna hold back. But like,
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, Eric is a nerd. But since I was a kid, I was huge into professional wrestling, comic books, video games, like all these different things around entertainment. And it wasn't really until I got to high school that actually had a graphic design course. And I didn't realize until later that like a lot of schools don't actually have graphic design, at
Oh,
least not in high school. Did you have graphic design in high school?
not in high school, no. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of an odd thing, right? But I got into it and it was all about like screen printing, right? So we would use the emulsions and the squeegees and all that fun stuff to make t-shirts.
Right.
And my teacher, his name was Kurt Ryder. He taught me that, I can take my illustrations and the stuff that I love to do by hand and like put it on something, right? Put it on a shirt, put it on a poster. And that was sort of what got me thinking like, hey, like maybe I could do this and like learn how to get really good at this by going to college. And so, I kind of did all that, went to the Art Institute in Brookline Village in Boston, which
Yep.
I don't know if I should say it or not, but I think they went under.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was basically after you left, they're like, well, we broke the mold. We can't get any better. So.
Well, thank you. I'd certainly like to think of it that way, and it was just, I mean, it was a good experience for me. I'll be honest. I really enjoyed just learning all these foundational things about design. But one thing that they didn't teach me were potential career paths.
Yes, this always, no matter what, in humanities, there seems to be kind of a, when you get into the arts, that seems to be something glaring. So tell me a little bit about how you did learn that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really wasn't until after I graduated and, I got my first gig after college, which I was working in this like really small shop doing like art licensing, right? It was basically taking other people's artwork and like putting it on calendars and mugs. It was not the most fun or exciting job in the world, but it gave me a start to kind of see what it was like. And I realized through doing that, I was like, you know what, like this isn't what I want to be doing. So I had to kind of think to myself, like, what direction do I want to go in? And, as somebody who always loved, like I said, film, video games, comics, I started thinking, what if I could be a graphic designer for, some of these companies that, make movie posters, make covers for video games and things like that. So I started getting into, New York City and started looking for those opportunities. And I linked up with a creative placement agency. You're probably familiar with these kinds of companies, but if not, I can just tell you really quickly.
Yeah, tell us. I mean, this definitely for our audience. Some will know, some won't. So yeah, please.
So, for a lot of creatives like myself, there are these creative placement agencies, which essentially are sort of like the middleman or the middle woman or person between the designer and the places looking to hire them.
Mm-hmm.
So I linked up with a creative placement agency called Creative Circle when I first moved to New York. And I met with them, interviewed with them, showed them my portfolio, and then they kind of like shopped it around for me a little bit. So they had the connections. And within, I would say, a couple of days after meeting with them, they called me up and they said, hey, would you be interested in doing like a freelance gig with Nickelodeon? And I was like, hell yeah, I'm down for that.
Yeah.
And, I got in there, I started working there. It was only 3 or 4 months, I would say. But at that moment, like the light bulb really went on for me. And I was like, hey, like this is fun. Like this is what I'm really excited about. And that's sort of how I discovered, getting into entertainment design and really what key art is. I didn't even know what the term key art was until that point when I started working there.
Well, and that's a great segue. I don't want to commandeer the definition. So for key art, like how would you describe that?
I think it's really interesting, right? Because the key art is really the main visual, right? It's the thing that it could be for a lot of people the first sort of introduction that they have into your project, right? It could be the first thing that they see. And in some ways, I tend to think of it a little bit like the branding for your film, for your show, for your album, for your video game, right? Because it's helping to tell a story. And one of the biggest challenges with key art design is that, I have tremendous respect for filmmakers, for television producers, everything like that. But, that said, it's like you have more frames to tell that story, right? With film, with video. But with key art, it's like you're trying to tell a story in a single frame or a single image.
Right.
So that's kind of how I think of key art.
Do you have, or who are some of the artists that inspired you or do inspire you? I mean, I'll give you, for me, like Chip Kidd comes to mind, obviously. Talking about using having the ability to tell a story with a quick frame. I think
Oh,
I think about like what he did with Jurassic Park, and then like a biography of Charles Schultz that I read, and of course, I can't get more recognizable than the Charlie Brown shirt that he did. But yeah, I just wondered as far,
iconic.
yeah, totally iconic. If there were, artists and designers that you looked to or do look to.
That's a great question. I mean, one of the first that comes to mind has to be James Verdesoto, who is
Mm,
a very renowned and respected key art designer. He actually created the poster for Pulp Fiction,
yeah, yeah, we
right?
actually got to talk with him, and um, he's been on our podcast. We talked to him, and it was a phenomenal discussion, as you can imagine, and definitely talked a little bit about that poster. I mean, it's infamous, famous. It's yeah, as I can imagine, and it was all of our listeners right now immediately know what that poster looks like. And actually, I would love to hear you. I mean, hearing James talk about it is a little different because he did it, and I would love to hear with your eye a little bit about that poster and its effect and why it's effective.
Wow. Well, I think that's awesome that you guys had James on the podcast. I will definitely have to listen to that episode because he is one of my sort of biggest inspirations as a key art designer.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, Obviously, it's an iconic poster, like you said. I mean, you said it really well. I think it's the combination of the type, the image, the color palette, but we also have to look at it for, the time that it came out, right? I think
Hmm.
during the time when Pulp Fiction was first sort of introduced to us, the technology was a little bit different, sort of what was possible was a little bit different. But I think during that time, he just did such a fantastic job of telling the story in that single frame, right? And having all of the cast names there, that really does a lot of the heavy lifting for you too. But
Right.
James is really a master of working with type and image in such a beautiful way. Um, Really funny story actually. When I first was planning to move to New York,
Hmm.
I came here and I did an interview with a company called Indica Entertainment
No
Advertising,
way. Yeah, that's yeah.
and that's his company, right?
Yep, that's it. Uh,
And I was so amazed, right? Just to have an opportunity to go there and interview with them.
so cool.
Um, and I was very green at the time, right? Like I was just kind of cutting my teeth a little bit, so to speak. And I was supposed to go in and start training and learning from them.
Mm,
And I was actually sidelined with an injury. I had hurt my right hand, which is of course the money making hand, right? And
right.
I basically what happened was I got injured at the gym. Just a little scrape on my hand turned into like a really bad staph infection.
Oh damn.
And I was hospitalized for like 6 days, and I couldn't use my right hand for about 3 months. And so I said, listen, like it really broke my heart because I was so excited to start with them. And this injury sidelined me and I lost the opportunity to work with one of my idols.
Wow. And was Vivek there as well, I suppose? Yeah, because we got to chat with him too. Man, what a oh but
Yeah.
just so everybody knows, your hands, everything's working now. Everything's back up. Which
Everything's good. Yeah.
and I know specifically too, you speaking of with this iconic poster and film and indie film, I know that you love working with indie filmmakers.
I
And
do.
tell me, like, when do they normally come to you? And then, like, when would you like them to come to you? And what are some of the, I would say, conversations that you have in order to, get their vision, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And obviously sometimes there can be a bit of a gap between like the ideal, like what we're hoping for, and then the reality of like what actually is, right?
Right.
I think in a lot of cases, I can tell you from having worked at some of the networks that you mentioned at the top, right? Like working with Sci-Fi, working with, A&E, which is
Mm-hmm.
A&E History and Lifetime. A lot of the times I'll begin working with for a project, I'll begin working on it usually during the filming or after the filming. So it's never really having those conversations before the filming begins, the production begins.
Mm-hmm.
I think 9 times out of 10, The key art kind of falls under the marketing and like the post-production side of things. So let's say, for example, if I'm working with an independent filmmaker, right, and
Mm-hmm.
they've already begun working on their project a little bit, or they have the script and they know, maybe the shooting is even underway. A lot of the times I can take, you know, let's say they're filming on location. If they can do what I call pull asides and get some shots of the talent, if they can maybe grab some unit or sort of episodic stuff that's like capturing the action while it's being filmed,
Mm-hmm.
I can use that stuff in the poster. And if we're really lucky, if there's a budget and if there's time for it, we can set up, entire separate days for shoots to have like a gallery with a seamless backdrop where we can, have a concept, right? And kind of light everybody really beautifully so that we can then, compose them together in a piece of key art. So ideally, I would have that opportunity to maybe get some photography of the talent, any really important scenes that are going to help tell that story while the filming and production is happening. But a lot of times it doesn't always happen that way. And sometimes I kind of come in at the end once the project is mostly filmed.
Gotcha. And so within some of that process, and you're kind of and you're getting all the material together, and so I think tell me a little bit more about your conversation with the filmmaker, and like what those typical conversations are like, or successful ones are anyway, how your relationship is.
Well, I can tell you that, I love working with independent filmmakers, especially because, sometimes if you're at a network or a larger company, there's a lot of people in between me and, the client ultimately. But
Right.
working with you guys, working with some other independent filmmakers that I've had the pleasure of collaborating with, it really gives me an opportunity to speak directly, with the people who are creating this film. And so anytime I can have that conversation, I just want to pick their brain, right? I just want to listen. And I really try to just do a lot of listening so that I can, understand what their vision is, what they're trying to achieve, what they want to see. And just in hearing people talk about that, it makes me feel even more imbued with passion and creativity, because now it's like I'm kind of in their head a little bit.
Right.
Right. So that's really the goal, is like I want to get in their head and I want to help them bring their vision to life. And I think that as a key art designer, that's one of my strongest skill sets, is the ability to sit down, literally have a conversation with just about anybody and be able to ask them questions so that I can kind of, figure out what direction is going to work, what they're going for in terms of the tone, the mood, the feel, and the storytelling.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great place. I may just dive right in here because we have a case test for our movie Heard. That you did the key art for, and is absolutely phenomenal. And it's a action horror film, and has a lot of there's like the undercurrent, or the riptide, if you will, has a lot of political riptide, as I like to say, and would love to just use that to jump right in and talk with working together with you and your conversations that you had, and when Stephen, who is the director and the co-writer, came to you with ideas, and how that process laid out to get to our final image, which we'll have a link for everyone in the show notes to the fantastic image. Which I will not describe yet. We're going to get there, but I want to start with the process itself, how those conversations started, what the images originally were, and just walking through that story. So yeah, just how did it begin?
Well, I'm just want to start by saying how excited I am to see this film like come to life, to see it go through the entire process. I'm extremely excited for Stephen, for you, for all of Framework Productions, and to even have been a small part of that. I am just very grateful. And I've known Stephen for a pretty long time now, and I've had the pleasure of working with him on a couple of projects.
Mm-hmm.
But with this one in particular, I think it always kind of begins with just that conversation, like, hey, tell me what is the story here? What is it about, trying to get to the essence of what it is, right? And I think once we sort of had that initial conversation, I'll kind of go back, and just in terms of like the process, to explain it a little bit to any of the listeners or
Right.
people who aren't as familiar, I'll usually go back and put together like a mood board, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So part of my process, once I have that conversation, I'm going to go and do the research. I'm going to do the inspiration, look at, what are similar types of movies or genres that have, done this something similar before. And then I like to put together a document that basically shows anywhere from like 5, 6, 7 different creative approaches. Sometimes I'll call them buckets or lanes that I think can work.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is each bucket or lane will sort of be a different style, different techniques that we can sort of group together. And that way I can then go back to the client, right? And we can talk about it and I can see what are they responding to? What are they drawn to visually? Is there anything that they really don't like, right? And feel strongly against if they're like, absolutely not, we're not doing that. And all of this is just feedback that helps me understand and try to get a little bit closer to what they're trying to achieve. So that's kind of what we did. And I forget exactly how many sort of directions we looked at, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there were a couple that, we were kind of gravitating towards. And from there, I began kind of jumping into Photoshop, and I work with my drawing tablet and Photoshop to start, retouching images, composing things together. But I think when we started working on it, we didn't really have much photography yet. Like
Right.
it wasn't, they weren't fully in swing with production yet. So this happens a lot, right? And in those cases, I'll sometimes have to use maybe placeholder images, maybe stock photography sometimes, and things that can be swapped out later. But initially, I just want to try to capture that idea and try to help tell that story based off of the conversations that we had.
Yeah, and I think to that, I just for our listeners, I'm going to give the pitch, and we can talk about kind of where it started because you were talking about some placeholders because it is a woman trying to outrun her past and ends up trapped between a zombie outbreak and warring militia groups, and she's engulfed in a world where some fight for survival and others fight for control. And I think kind of using that as your jumping off point at one of your early pieces, I remember had a woman standing, right in the middle along the vanishing horizon there to like really kind of set her apart, make her alone, and then started surrounding her with the dangers, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think that was one of the concepts, and we just wanted to capture that eerie mood, right? It was sort of this bluish, greenish, eerie tone, and you could really see how, the colors start to tell a story already, right? It's like when you
Mhm.
see certain colors, it just evokes and elicits feelings, right? Certain feelings from someone. And so that's how I'm trying to use and sort of manipulate the visual language to try and convey those stories. And I remember we had a couple of others too that were like very, close up with like a lot of hands kind of around faces and really trying to create this almost sort of claustrophobic feeling of being
Yes.
surrounded. And then of course it's layered, right? Like you said, you're also trying to incorporate, the sort of militia or militant aspects of the story, the fight for survival, and the very human elements of this story. So
Right.
there's a lot of layers there that we were trying to peel back and convey.
And you had mentioned color, and I'd like in a very more universal question as far as like how you approach color use, and like let's say with an action horror film, or specifically a zombie, genre versus the a bright comedy from the mid 2000s or something.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things. I actually find it very fascinating, right? I mentioned before I'm a nerd. I could nerd out over just this topic alone for a
I'm
long
in.
time.
I'm in.
I mean, I think it's one of those things like, say, for example, when you think of, comedy films, maybe famous posters, famous key art that you've seen, a lot of the times I notice patterns with them, right? You'll see
Mhm.
certain colors like yellow, orange. They sort of feel hopeful. They feel inviting and fun.
Well, there's that
Um,
infamous or famous one from 40-Year-Old Virgin, you know,
yes.
with
Yeah.
that bright color.
And there was another one too that I was thinking of with like Kevin Hart and The Rock or something. I'm blanking on the name, but it's like a very typographic poster that's primarily yellow, and then it's just got like the talent on it. Um,
Right.
things like that, right? You see that a lot. And also you tend to see a lot of posters that are like clean white backgrounds with just bold red or black type, like very clean, for comedy type posters,
Right.
right? But then when you start going towards, let's say, like sci-fi alien type stuff, anything like that, you see a lot of those, blues, turquoise, and like a greenish blue color palette. And something that you see a lot in film posters is like the orange and blue combination. They
Right.
they do that all the time, right?
Yeah.
And because it works, and it holds up. But then when you start to go more into the horror, zombie, creepy type of movies, again, you'll see like a lot of red, but you'll also see a lot of like grittiness, distress, texture, grunge, things that just look really dirty and worn. So, as a poster designer and a key art designer, like I'm always trying to be very mindful of those things and how I can use them to my advantage anytime I'm trying to help an independent filmmaker or a company bring their ideas to life.
Well, and you talked about like the gritty. I mean, there's to get back to the where we landed on the poster for Herd. Talk a little bit about the background where you landed, and just it's the colors, and then I do want to get into the topography of it as well because it's very unique and it's fantastic. But I want to start there. How you got with the pattern and the worn and the grittiness of it, and then what you layered on top, and then we'll get to the topography.
So when creating that poster, I really was starting to think about different ways that I could layer, these textures together. I didn't want it to just look like something super, basic. I think like the story itself, there's a lot of layers. There's a lot of things to peel back.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm creating this, I'm layering different, smoke textures, to create this sort of eerie environment. A lot of really gritty, distressed looking textures to make it look like, you know, there's something happening here. There's, almost like things have been clawed and destroyed and worn away, right? Like civilization and society when you're looking at those things in that light. And through layering up all of these images, creating sort of a nice color palette that felt sort of like, almost like you're in a bunker somewhere, right? And there's like one light overhead and it's kind of moody, like sepia tone almost. Like it just felt right for this film.
Mm.
And then of course, working in the combination of using the skull with some elements from the flag and things like that. The skull obviously being kind of blown apart a little bit on the top, just a really sort of impactful image. And I just wanted to create something that had that, stopping power that is going to grab somebody's attention and make them say, hey, I want to know what this movie's about.
Yeah, that's that exactly like the skull itself, and like there's a little bit of chunk out of it as well.
Yeah.
And that I want to talk about the topography, and then also just that choice on that photography for the word herd, and because I know that was not the original title, that was a title landed on, and where you came to with this topography, and then also I want to start looking at the process. Again, kind of use that to kind of pull out and start talking about topography and your love for it, and let you nerd out on it as part of your process when you're creating something.
Yeah, I think, with this film, I can say like as a key art designer, right? It's always when we were talking about sort of the ideal and versus like the reality, right? Like I
Right.
think this was one of those projects where it was ideal. And in a lot of cases, it's ideal if you have like a shorter title,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you have like a single word or like one or two words, it's great because you can make it huge. You can really pick some interesting typefaces to work with versus, let's say, for example, you have a title that's like 2 sentences long, right? If it's like, I mean, when I was working for A&E and things like that, some of the movies would have longer titles, some of the shows would have longer titles. And there was a show on Netflix that was almost kind of poking fun of it a little bit. It was like, the girl in the window down the street who was watching her neighbor, like that was like the title of the film. It was like a paragraph long. And those are extremely challenging, because, it's going to take up so much space. You really have to be mindful of how you're laying it out. So with Herd, it was great to just be able to work with that one word there. And what I was looking for was to do something a little bit sort of unexpected, right? So using a serif typeface that almost has a little bit of a cleaner sort of feel to it. It feels almost not like corporate or anything like that, but you typically see serif fonts in certain applications. So I wanted to apply that to this poster because it was a little bit different and unexpected versus, just a bold, condensed sans serif typeface like we're seeing so much now.
Mm.
And in doing that, I was then able to add little cracks, little bits and textures here and there that made it feel really sort of worn and broken down, like, just like the people in our story, right? They've been through so much, they've survived, and it's really about their ongoing survival, and trying to just fight to get through another day. So I wanted to try and express that visually as best as I could.
Yeah, and it's like gives it that antiquing, like you said, the more and a patina, if you will.
Yeah,
It's like that. It's been around. It's been. It's
exactly.
Yeah. Well, and that does make me want to look at the process more, and your process specifically as a whole, like, with fonts, and where do you like to get them, and where do you look for a font? How do you choose those colors? What goes into that for you?
It's a big question. I think as much as I love key art design and I've been doing poster design for a long time, something I mentioned a little bit earlier is that I sometimes think of key art design almost like branding.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime I've ever created a logo or helped somebody establish a set of, brand guidelines, it always usually begins with trying to find unique typefaces, right? And the reason
Right.
that I say key art and poster design is a little bit like branding, in my mind at least, is because let's say you take that key art poster, right, for the project you've just finished. Now you need to go and put it on different platforms, right? If it's going to
Right.
be on Netflix, YouTube, wherever. And now let's say it's going to be in a magazine or on a billboard or in the subway. So all of these different places where your artwork is living, when people see it, right, they're not just seeing the visual, but if we break it down, they're seeing the fonts, they're seeing the colors, they're seeing the textures, all of these things that are also very applicable to brands,
Right.
right?
And you want to direct their eye and like the direction of what they should focus on in what order.
Exactly. You want to have the visual hierarchy there, but it's also like I guess I could explain it sort of like a visual language, so to speak, right?
Sure.
So if you take, if you take the title off of the poster and you still show the image out there, there's enough there for somebody to still maybe say, hey, I know what that is, and they recognize it. And you'll have the ability to sort of elicit those feelings, those emotions anytime somebody sees or engages with the artwork wherever it's going to live. So I think that's kind of how I think about the relationship between branding and key art. So when I'm doing that, I'm going to Adobe fonts, Monotype. There's a lot of really good type foundries out there. I also tend to use sites like Envato, Creative Market. They have very reasonably priced licensing options, and that is something that you always want to be careful of. I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but I would just say, for a lot of designers out there to be mindful of where their fonts are coming from. So if you're going to defont.com, you're not going to be able to use that on a commercial project, right? You have to go to other places where you're actually, licensing your typefaces and fonts. But those are some of the places where I usually like to begin the search when I'm looking for nice display fonts and typefaces that I can use in logos, for branding, and for key art design.
And that's very helpful. And then as far as color goes, then I guess a little bit of hand in hand there. We touched on it a little bit, but you were talking. I think it's the lanes. I think you were that you put them in, and so you've got your fonts and your colors, and and your backgrounds. And so I guess part of the process question too from for me is, if it is going to be poster art, so to speak, do you start from like an 11 by 17 tabloid idea? Or does that just kind of come as you're building out your process? I don't want to lead you with that question, but I just did.
No, it's totally fine. I think you know, one of the things, 11 by 17 is like the sort of a standard tabloid size
Right.
paper, right? And so a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's like the standard poster size." But typically for key art,
Mm-hmm.
poster design, sometimes people also call them one sheets. I believe the standard size that I usually use is around 18 by 24.
Yep.
So it is a slightly larger size. But anytime I'm creating a poster design or a piece of key art, one thing that I am always trying to be very mindful of is the bleed, right? And for those who aren't familiar with the term bleed, it's sort of like the area outside of those dimensions. And why that's important is, let's say I'm creating an 11 by 17 or an 18 by 24-inch poster. If you now need to take that poster and you need to go and create digital banners, if you're creating ads that are going to be online, there's going to be a lot of situations where you need it resized, right? So you could be taking that vertical poster, and we did that with Herd too. We took the vertical poster and we made it into a horizontal poster. So the reason that, you always want to have that bleed and that extra image outside is so that you're giving yourself enough space and enough room and flexibility to sort of create those other sizes for different cases and mediums.
Right. Yeah, that's a great note. Just knowing that it's going to have to be on different platforms, different media, and especially these days, just who knows what shape it needs to be in. And I guess too, the looking at backgrounds, we talked a little bit about the grittiness of, say, the Pulp Fiction, or the for me, like the cleanliness of Jurassic Park. Part of your process looking at backgrounds. I would like to talk a little bit about your process in that as well, specifically.
So you mean looking at backgrounds, like taking inspiration from other designs, or?
Yeah, or just like if you have a property, you're talking to the filmmaker, and they have ideas. Are you starting with the background to kind of build, like literally give you the foundation? Do you start with the topography, and then kind of flesh out that process for us?
Yeah, no. Okay. I think I see where you're going. And I think a lot of the times, backgrounds are super important, of course, but something that I feel a lot of designers don't always spend enough time doing,
Mm-hmm.
and something that I always do at the very beginning of the process, is the research, right? So there's the research when you're talking about gathering inspiration from other films,
Right.
and maybe identifying things that you would like to carry over into a project, but also the research that goes into finding the right types of images to work with in the first place. Right. So
Yeah.
a lot of times, let's say you're working on a project for, an action movie or a horror film or something like that. You want to spend time to try to find the right elements. And I know there's a lot of designers, maybe those especially early on in their career, they'll go to a site like Shutterstock or Adobe Stock or Getty Images and just grab, the first thing they can find. But they're not always thinking about how those elements are going to come together. So really taking the time to be deliberate and, sort of discerning when you're trying to find the right types of images to work with. So for me, that's kind of the first step before I even, I am thinking about the background, of course, but I'm thinking about how are these pieces going to fit together as a whole.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so with, I know you shared, and I want to talk about your YouTube channel, which I find just fantastic. And there's what you have up there right now is I think it's the day in the life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the and I love it. You talk about is it your Clophis? Clophis? What did you call it?
The Clophis. Yeah,
The
that's right.
Clophis. I'd love to hear about just your setup, because I know that you mentioned this, and I think any of us in this industry can agree, organization is everything. And if you're organized, you can go anywhere, you can do anything. And so I'd love to hear about a little bit about your organization in your setup, and which of course takes you into the process.
100%. I think organization is key. You're absolutely right. And it's funny, Matt, because I've always been kind of like a little bit of an OCD type,
Uh-huh.
and I think this is maybe coming back to the design. It's like I want everything to kind of be like lined up, you know what I mean, to kind of be aligned.
Right.
It's like I'll go and make sure that the books are sitting on the shelf like like in a certain way. I know it probably sounds crazy, but
No,
but
not at all.
that's kind of how it is. So for me and for a lot of people, anybody who lives in a city, especially a city like New York, space is a premium,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we don't always have a ton of space to work. And during the pandemic, I was working in my bedroom, and then I would tried to work in the entryway for a little while. And it was just so hard for me to focus, to feel like I had any kind of separation between the living space and the working space, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking to myself, here's this, hallway closet that's essentially just, a storage closet right now. And we decided to convert that into an office. And I had seen it on Pinterest or something like that, right? There were people who were doing this, and it was sort of like a trend. And I was like, that's kind of cool. I think I want to do this. Um, so, over the course of a couple of months, my wife and I, we kind of demoed the old closet, sanded it, painted it, and then
Nice.
we basically installed like a whole shelving system from the Container Store. And it was like, hey, this is my chance to sort of set this up the way that's going to optimize my creativity and my workflow. So I got all these like storage bins. I got my new computer in there with my drawing tablet, cameras, microphones, pretty much any kind of tech and gadgets that I needed. And I just set it up like exactly how I wanted it to. So that way, when I go in there, it's actually fun. Like it inspires me and makes me want to create. So I think it's really important to try and surround yourself with, little things that are going to spark your creativity and make you feel good about the space that you're in. Because I know for me, it made a huge difference, especially when I started getting back to the YouTube channel. I did take a break from it for a few years. And at the end of last year, I decided that I wanted to get back into it again,
Mm.
and I wanted to take a different approach. Um, to be honest with you, I mean, I love YouTube and I could watch tutorials all day on there, but in my mind, there's so many channels that are just sort of like a random collection of tips and tricks to teach you things, right?
Right.
Whether it's Premiere, After Effects, Photoshop, anything. But what I want to do, now and going forward is to kind of peel it back a little bit, to be a little bit more personal and vulnerable with people, to show them what it's really like, to be a key art designer living in New York City. To show what I'm going through and documenting my journey now as a freelance designer, trying to, start my own business and make it on my own, working with movie companies, independent filmmakers, and TV networks.
Yeah, and I gotta say that the going the personal route, it's so I love it. I have to say, Eric, it's really a great way to connect. Like you said, not just with the tips and tricks, but actually connect with the reality of what it is to do what you do. Um, and I think that in and of itself really informs the process of doing it. And so that's great. So just so our if our listeners they're going to be there, so we're gonna if they're looking for you, where can they find you? Is your YouTube channel the best place to go find you?
Certainly the YouTube channel is one of the best places. When I first started the channel, it was just called Teach Me to Design.
Uh huh.
And I realized, that served its purpose. That was a really important sort of chapter in my story. But I felt like the name Teach Me to Design wasn't really matching with where I am at this point in my life and career. In some ways, it kind of lended itself to maybe more of those beginner type tutorials, right?
Mm.
Versus now I've sort of pivoted and changed it to just Eric Vasquez Design. So if you look up, Eric Vasquez Design on YouTube, you'll see the channel. All the old videos are still there, but really I'm trying to grow and build a community that will sort of meet me at this point where I am in my life and in my career, because I want to help people who aren't familiar with key art or how to break into entertainment, or who just want to see like the reality of it, right? Because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Like you guys know, and a lot of creatives know, it's hard.
Yeah.
There's times where it's hard to stay motivated. There's times where, you feel burnt out. There's times where you feel uninspired, right? But still, those are the kind of things that I want to share because it's real. And I'm to be honest, like I'm tired of like people always acting like, everything is great, everything's fine. Like here's my beautiful picturesque life. Like I want to connect with people in a very real way. And the YouTube channel gives me a great way to not only continue to teach about, the things that I'm passionate about with, movie posters, key art, and branding, but it also gives me an opportunity to try and connect on that deeper level and to say, hey, you know what? Like our health, our well-being, our mental, emotional, and physical states, like if those things aren't in check, it's going to be really hard to show up as our best selves when we want to be creative.
That's a great point. I think specifically when you get down to it, you can be super talented, but if there's either no heart or you're not in touch with what's going on in your own life, you're not going to be able to give that those talents and share them. And I think we are at a kind of an intersection here where there's so much at us that's kind of well put together, and even though we know it's not all true, the cognitive dissonance of being bombarded with those things every day, that everything is rosy, everything is perfect, and then turning that back around and saying, well, hey, my job is to create these beautiful visuals, and I'm gonna let you see the mess underneath that makes it that gives it the heart, and makes it real. So I think that's great. And yeah, it's Eric Vasquez Design on YouTube, and we'll have that in the show notes as well. And this is just awesome. I really this has been a great talk, Eric. And really, really appreciate it. I do want to ask before we go, just a lightning round, good poster, bad poster, or actually, it'll be good poster, great poster. And this is just your opinion. It could be the best poster in the world, and you're like, yeah, it's a good poster, or whatever. All right. These are posters I think everybody's going to know, and we'll start with what I think is an easy one. Jaws.
Great poster.
All right. Rosemary's Baby.
Has good elements. I'm going to say good poster.
Okay. I mentioned it before, Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park. I got to say it's great. It's so iconic. You know right away what it is, and it's just lived through the years. The longevity is just the recognition and the longevity. It's there. It's a great poster.
Yeah. And I know, just quick side note, that the T-Rex in the bones that's there, I think it was Chip Kidd who had gotten it from the book itself. Like, so if you go back and look at the original publication of the book, that's actually the same design. Anyway, Vertigo. What about Vertigo?
Oh man, I'm a little embarrassed to say I can't picture that.
It's a hard, yeah, no. That's with Jimmy Stewart. It's the thing that stood out to me is the designer, it's Saul Bass. He had written Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece at the top, and for years I'd never really thought about it. And then I was like, wait, that was a ballsy move. This movie hadn't even come out. He probably hadn't seen it yet. And but you know which one I'm talking about, right?
Yes, it's sort of a graphic poster, right? It's
Yes.
very graphic. It's like 2 or 3 colors. And I think it's successful. It's a good poster. I love the typography on it.
Okay, yeah. So we're going good poster.
We're going good poster for that one.
Yeah, that's I think the typography I really like. It's like that German expressionism, throwback. All right, I said it was the lightning round. I'm not going to lie. Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, I love Silence of the Lambs. That's one of my favorite posters.
Yeah.
Great poster.
What's one thing you really like about that poster? What stands out? What makes it great?
It's just so eerie, right? It's just very creepy. It's just it just kind of hits you in the face, and I know there's been a couple of them, right? So
Right.
it's one of those posters that like it's been made over and over again, by different people. But what I love about it is just the simplicity, right? It's just the face, it's Clarice, it's the butterfly, and you're like, what is this story about? But it pulls you in, and it begs to tell people more.
And you keep going. Then you see the skull. Then you see that the skull is made out of women's bodies, and it's just like, what? All right, E.T.
I love the ET poster too. That is a classic. That's one that I've actually wanted to get sort of like framed. I just need to send it out and get it, get it framed up for my office because I need to put some movie posters up. And that is one that's definitely on my list. So I got to say great poster.
Nice. Okay. And then lastly, Scarface.
Oh, dude, you hit me with Scarface.
Yeah, had to end with that one.
Scarface is a great poster. And it's the reason for that too is because you can see how some of these posters, like Silence of the Lambs, like Scarface, they've influenced so many other posters, right? When you see like a lot of the sort of like mobster gangster movies, like a lot of those posters, you can almost make a direct line to Scarface and what they were able to achieve with that just simple black, white, and red poster, high contrast, beautiful, bold imagery and typography. It's a great poster for sure.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to end. So come at us in the comments. It's all Eric's fault. I think they're all great. But that's going to be at Eric Vasquez Design. So please check him out. And just the amazing designer who just rocked it out on Herd. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Eric.
Thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed the conversation today. Also, be sure to, check out my website, ericvasquez.net, and check me out on LinkedIn. Between those two sites and YouTube, that's where you'll find me.
Rock and roll. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hey, friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about two personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd, H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV and, of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's herd.film, herd.film as well. Thank you again, and be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.